Chapter 1. The sand that remember is the desert keeps memories, the way the ocean keeps salt hidden in every grain, in every shifting dune, in every mirage that shimmers beneath the twin suns. There was a boy there once, not yet shaped into the weapon or the shadow he would become, a boy whose hands were calloused, not from wielding a lightsaber, but from scavenging in the skeletons of ships older than his world. His name was Anakin Skywalker, and he was a slave. Not in the manner of forgotten history books, where chains are rusted iron and whips crack in the open air, but bound by codes of ownership buried deep in the circuitry of the galaxy's most indifferent machines. His master was not cruel for the sake of cruelty. He was simply part of the order of things, a small link in the great, merciless chain of trade and survival that bound worlds like Tatooine to the darker arteries of the galaxy. And the boy, bright-eyed and restless, did not yet know that destiny had already fixed its gaze upon him. From the earliest days, the Force gathered around him like a slow-forming storm. It whispered to him in moments too fleeting to understand, a reflex that let him finish sentences others had barely begun, a vision of danger seconds before it arrived, an unerring hand when he piloted through mazes of scrap and wire. It was not training, it was instinct, and it unsettled those who noticed. His mother saw it most clearly. She feared it as much as she cherished it, for she knew that such gifts often come with a cost, and the galaxy never pays such debts in kindness. She told him stories when the night winds howled through the city's alleys, stories of Jedi who could move mountains with a thought, of warriors who carried peace like a torch. Anakin listened, and in the space between her words, the Force whispered again, "You are more." The desert's sky was vast enough to swallow dreams whole, yet Anakin's were larger still. In his mind, he walked between stars and commanded ships so vast they could blot out suns. He did not dream of escaping alone. He dreamed of freeing his mother, his friends, everyone he had ever seen bow their heads to the casual cruelty of survival. Even as a child, his ambition had edges, sharp, bright edges that caught the light of his yearning. But yearning is a dangerous fuel. The more it burns, the more it consumes. And already the Force within him was learning the taste of hunger. He worked in Watto's shop, repairing speeders and paddresses, with hands that seemed to know more than they should. Customers came and went, most indifferent, some contemptuous, a few intrigued by the boy's skill, yet those who lingered too long felt something unsettling in his gaze, not menace, but an intensity too great for his years, as if he were peering not just at them, but through them, past the now into the branching possibilities of what might be. He laughed like any child, he played like any child, but the moments in between were heavy with a stillness that felt out of place under the suns. One day, fate arrived on the hot wind. They came not as traders or criminals, but as seekers, robed figures with eyes that weighed and measured without malice, yet without mercy either. Jedi, the boy had heard of them in stories, yet now one stood before him, tall and calm, with a voice like water running over stone. Qui-Gon Jinn. There was no proclamation, no sudden declaration of destiny, only questions, small at first, then sharper. How fast can you build? How well can you race? Do you know fear? The boy answered, without understanding the trap being laid, not by Qui-Gon, but by the Force itself. For every answer drew the thread tighter, pulling him toward a destiny from which there would be no return. The Padres was the test, though Anakin did not know it. His survival, his victory, was no accident. The Force surged through him, guiding his hands, quickening his reflexes, turning disaster into triumph. To the crowd, it was spectacle. To Qui-Gon, it was confirmation. To the Force, it was the inevitable unfolding of a prophecy older than the Republic itself. That night, when the race's dust had settled and the city's noise had quieted, Qui-Gon spoke to the boy's mother. The words were quiet, but they cut deeply. He spoke of a future beyond slavery, beyond Tatooine, beyond anything either of them could imagine. But freedom for one meant leaving the other behind. Anakin did not cry when the choice was made. He believed, with the unshakable certainty of youth, that he would return for her soon. But the desert remembers, and it knows that promises are fragile. Things easily broken by the storms between stars. The boy stepped onto the ship that would take him away, clutching a small carved charm from his mother, the last warmth of Tatooine in his hands. He did not know that the moment the ship's ramp closed, the life he had known would become a ghost, one that would follow him into every battle, every choice, every shadow that lay ahead. The stars opened before him for the first time, vast and silent. He pressed his face to the viewport, watching Tatooine shrink into nothing. The twin suns that had lit every day of his life were now just points of light, indistinguishable from the countless others. Somewhere behind him, in the darkness between worlds, the prophecy stirred. It did not care for love or longing, for the pain of separation or the innocence of the boy. It cared only for balance, and balance, in the language of the Force, often meant destruction, and so the desert kept his footprints, the city kept his echoes, and the sand remembered. Chapter 2, The Mark of the CHOS. The Journey. From Tatooine to Coruscant was not measured in hours or parsecs, but in the slow unfolding of revelation. The boy, still barefoot in the ways of the wider galaxy, moved through the ship like a spirit caught between two worlds. He had seen the arc of a padraiser through boiling desert winds, but now his eyes traced the curve of distant moons, the shimmer of nebulas like spilled paint across the black. To him, every sight was wonder. To Qui-Gon Jinn, every moment was confirmation. The Jedi Master had studied the boy's reflexes, his instincts, the unspoken harmony between thought and action. And with each passing hour, his certainty grew heavier. The boy was not merely gifted, he was marked. The Jedi spoke of the Chosen One in hushed tones, as if the prophecy itself were a dangerous thing to name aloud. It was said that one would come, conceived by no father, born of the Force itself, who would bring balance, whatever that balance truly meant. The scrolls in the deepest archives bore no agreement on its meaning. Some claimed it would be the end of the Sith, others that it would usher in an era neither light nor dark, but something beyond both. And there were those who feared that balance might come only through fire, war, and the breaking of empires. Qui-Gon had never been a man to bend his beliefs to fit the fears of others. He saw the boy's raw potential and felt in his bones that the ancient words had at last found their subject. Anakin did not yet know the weight being placed upon him. He walked the shining streets of Coruscant with wide eyes, oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around him. The Jedi Temple loomed ahead like a mountain of stone and light, its spires stabbing toward the stars, its shadow falling long over the city. Within, the air was cool, still, touched by the scent of incense and ancient wood. Statues of long forgotten guardians lined the grand hallways, their faces serene yet unreadable, as if they, too, were measuring him. The council awaited. 12 seats, 12 figures cloaked in the calm authority of the Order, their gazes sharp and unyielding. Yoda, small and ancient, studied him with eyes that seemed to see not just the boy, but the storms that would gather around him. Mace Windu's gaze was harder still, a weighing of risks against unspoken hopes. The questions began his past, his feelings, his visions of the future. When they asked what he feared, his answer came swift and unguarded: losing my mother. The words settled like ash in the chamber. Fear was the seed of the dark side. To hear it spoken so plainly from one so young was troubling. Then came the test, not of skill, but of essence. They measured his blood, seeking the count of midichlorians, those microscopic bridges between life and the Force. The number that came back was beyond anything they had seen, even in their greatest masters. It was a measure that should not have been possible, a raw connection that could not be ignored. And yet, the council hesitated. The boy was too old to begin training. His attachments were too strong. The shadow of the future they sensed in him was too dark. They spoke in careful tones, yet their refusal was clear. Qui-Gon defied them. He would not let the boy be cast back into the dust from which he had been lifted. To him, the prophecy was a path, and Anakin's place in it was undeniable. Even if the boy's destiny lay in fire, Qui-Gon believed that fire could be guided, shaped, used to burn away the rot that had settled unseen across the galaxy. He petitioned not as a loyal servant of the Council, but as a Jedi willing to bear the burden of choice alone. Anakin felt the pull between them, the warmth of Qui-Gon's belief, the cool distance of the Council's doubt. He did not fully understand their words, but he felt their weight. They spoke as though his life were not his own, as though his future had already been written in the stars above Tatooine. And perhaps it had, for the Force itself seemed to draw him forward, a silent current that ignored the protests of those who tried to dam its flow in the quiet hours after the audience. Anakin wandered the temple's lower halls. He ran his fingers along the carved stone, traced the patterns in the mosaics, stood before the tall windows that looked out over the infinite sprawl of Coruscant. Somewhere deep within the temple, in chambers no initiate was meant to enter, the archives whispered to themselves. If he could have heard them, he would have known that the word chosen had been spoken there long before his arrival, that the prophecy had been studied and feared in equal measure, and that his name, though not yet known, had been waiting to be etched alongside it. But knowledge is a blade, and the boy was not yet ready to hold it. For now, he was simply Anakin, a child from the desert with sand still clinging to his boots, standing at the threshold of a story too vast to see its end. The Council's doubts would linger, Qui-Gon's faith would burn, and somewhere in the currents of the Force, the prophecy turned its head, as if awakening from a long and dreamless sleep. Chapter 3, Temple of Light. Shadows, B'ina Techtha, Jedi. Temple was a sanctuary of light in a galaxy already dimming. Its towers reached upward like fingers seeking the stars, each spire crowned with ancient symbols meant to ward away darkness. Within its walls, silence ruled, not the silence of emptiness, but of discipline, of minds turned inward toward the steady current of the Force. For those who entered its gates as initiates, it was both home and crucible. For Anakin Skywalker, it was a world alien and glittering, a place where the air seemed cleaner, the corridors endless, and the weight of history pressed from every direction. Here, generations of Jedi had walked, trained, and vanished into the long story of the Order. Here, victories and tragedies alike had been buried beneath the marble floors. To the other children, Life in the temple was the only life they had ever known. They moved with the ease of those born into its ways, reciting the code with practiced voices, meditating until their minds were still as frozen lakes. Anakin watched them and felt the invisible gulf between himself and their calm. He had lived under the desert suns, smelled the hot dust in his lungs, heard the cries of slaves whose names would never be spoken in the council chamber. Their peace was not his peace. Their detachment felt cold against the heat of his memories. He learned quickly, but not always willingly, for the lessons of letting go clashed with the truths the desert had taught him. That survival meant holding on with everything you had, yet in the bright halls, shadows lingered. Not all could see them, but Anakin felt their touch. Sometimes, while wandering the temple alone, he would pass corridors where the light dimmed slightly, where the hum of the Force seemed deeper, heavier, almost reluctant. In the archives, among shelves that reached toward darkness, he would find scrolls too ancient to display, their seals marked with warnings. He did not know the words, but something in him recognized them. Old symbols of the Sith, the long-forgotten enemy. The Jedi had buried these records like bones beneath the temple floor, preserved but never spoken of. The Order's light was bright, but it cast a shadow long enough to touch even its most sacred spaces. The Masters trained him with care, though not without caution. Yoda's eyes followed him closely, as if watching for cracks in the vessel that might one day hold too much power. Mace Windu spoke to him in measured tones, guiding his sword hand with precision but never warmth. Obi-Wan Kenobi, bound by his promise to Qui-Gon, treated him with the quiet respect of a man both teacher and reluctant guardian. In each lesson, Anakin excelled with a speed that startled and sometimes unsettled his mentors. He could leap higher, react faster, and channel the Force with an ease that defied his age. But speed breeds impatience, and mastery without balance feeds the hunger for more in the meditation chambers. He sat cross-legged among the other younglings, eyes closed, listening to the steady breath of the group. The Masters taught them too. Let the Force flow through them without grasping, to be a channel rather than a dam. Yet Anakin could never help but shape it, bending it to his will, using it not just to feel but to reach. In those moments, the visions began, flashes of places he had never seen, of battles not yet fought, of a woman's face veiled in sorrow. They came unbidden, carrying both wonder and dread, and he did not know whether to welcome or fear them. The temple's teachings spoke often of balance, of harmony between light and dark. Yet Anakin noticed that the lessons of the dark were always warnings, never understanding. The Master spoke of it as a sickness, a wound in the Force, something to be destroyed rather than studied. But the desert had taught him another truth, that a wound left untended only festers in secret. Sometimes, alone in the archives, he would find himself drawn to the sealed holocrons, their crystals glinting faintly in the dim light. They called to him in whispers just beyond hearing, promising answers the Masters refused to give. It was in this place, surrounded by light yet brushed by shadow, that the seeds of doubt began to take root. He wondered why the Jedi hid so much, why truths were locked away like dangerous relics. He questioned why feelings of love, loyalty, and fear, the very bonds that had driven him to leave Tatooine, were treated as flaws to be erased. These were the things that made him human, and yet the Order seemed to demand he become something less than that in order to serve the Force. He did not yet rebel against these rules, but the questions did not leave him. The Force flowed through. The temple as through a great river, but beneath its bright surface, darker currents moved unseen. For now, Anakin walked the marble halls as a student of the light. But the holocron's voice, speaking from centuries ahead, tells us the truth. The darkness had already found him, and it would wait patiently in the shadow of every lesson he learned here. The temple believed itself unshakable. It had survived 1,000 years without the Sith. It did not see the storm rising in the heart of the boy it now sheltered. And storms, once born, do not remain gentle for long. Chapter 4. Fire in the Vins War came to the galaxy like a tide of steel and fire, sweeping away the quiet certainties of the Jedi Temple and replacing them with the constant hunger of conflict. The Clone Wars erupted with the suddenness of a lightning strike, yet its roots had been growing in secret for years, tangled in the ambitions of politicians and the schemes of unseen masters. To the common worlds, it was a fight for survival. To the Jedi, it was an unwanted burden, pulling them from the role of keepers of peace into the boots and armor of generals. And to Anakin Skywalker, it was a crucible in which his power could at last be tested without restraint. From the first battles, he shone like a star burning at the heart of the Republic's war machine. His reflexes, his command of the Force, his daring in the cockpit all marked him as a leader the clones would follow without hesitation. The soldiers, bred for loyalty and obedience, found in him not just a commander, but a figure of inspiration. He fought beside them, bled beside them, called them by name in a galaxy that often saw them only as numbers. His victories stacked quickly, each one a step higher on a path paved with praise, and with every cheer, every report of another mission completed against impossible odds, the ember of pride within him flared brighter. The Council saw the results, but also the danger. War had no patience for the slow discipline the Jedi taught. It rewarded decisiveness, boldness, even recklessness, traits Anakin possessed in abundance. The more victories he won, the more he came to trust his instincts over the measured counsel of his elders. The Jedi Code spoke of serenity, yet the battlefield demanded urgency. The Order preached detachment, yet every loss he took personally. Every fallen comrade a wound that deepened his resolve to end the war no matter the cost. In the midst of this storm, he found companionship in another warrior, Padam, now a senator and no longer the queen he had once pledged to protect. In stolen hours between campaigns, they spoke not as soldier and politician, but as two people bound by memories of Tatooine, Naboo, and the quiet hope that the war might one day end. Her presence was a bomb against the harshness of the front lines, yet it was also a spark feeding the fire within him. Love was forbidden to Jedi, yet the force between them did not diminish. It deepened, drawing him closer even as the code warned against such ties. Anakin's skills on the battlefield grew sharper, but so too did his temper. When orders from the Council conflicted with what he believed was right, he did not hesitate to bend or break them. His enemies began to fear his name, not only for the destruction he could bring, but for the swiftness with which he delivered it. And while his comrades saw a hero, the darker corners of the galaxy saw something else, a warrior whose loyalty to the Republic was matched only by his willingness to bend the rules that bound lesser men. It was during these years that Chancellor Palpatine's voice began to thread itself more deeply into Anakin's life. In the quiet aftermath of battles, in the shadowed halls of Coruscant's Senate, the Chancellor would speak to him not as a subordinate but as an equal, even a friend. He praised Anakin's victories, spoke admiringly of his courage, and whispered that the galaxy needed men like him, men unafraid to do what the timid would not. The words were like oil on water, spreading slowly, shaping how Anakin saw the war, the Jedi, and himself. The fire in Anakin's veins was no longer just the heat of youth or the thrill of combat. It was the hunger to shape the galaxy, to bend it away from endless compromise and toward what he saw as justice. Yet justice, once it begins to take the shape of personal will, teeters dangerously close to domination. The Jedi taught that the Force flowed through all things equally, yet Anakin felt it flowing through him more strongly than through any other. And with that belief came the conviction that perhaps he was meant to decide how it should be used. The war fed that conviction day by day, battle by battle. Each victory strengthened his belief that only decisive action, unburdened by the slow, cautious methods of the Council, could bring peace. But peace, in the language of war, is often just the name given to the silence left when one side has been destroyed. And though Anakin could not yet see it, that silence would one day come to the Jedi themselves. Chapter 5. The Serpent's WHISPR. The war had stretched on long enough that even victories began to taste of ash. Star systems traded hands like pieces on a board, planets liberated only to fall again months later, and the Senate chambers echoed with endless arguments while soldiers bled in the shadows of worlds most senators could not name. In that weariness, cracks began to form in the Republic, in the Jedi Order, and in the heart of Anakin Skywalker. It was in these cracks that the Chancellor's voice took root. Patient as a serpent coiling in the dark, Palpatine did not command Anakin the way generals issued orders. He guided him the way a shadow shapes the path of light, never pushing so hard that the motion could be resisted. In the grand halls of the Senate, surrounded by the glittering masks of politics, Palpatine's words to Anakin were quiet, personal, as if meant for him alone. He spoke of courage, of strength, of the necessity of decisive leaders in times of chaos. He never questioned Anakin's judgment. Instead, he reinforced it, telling him that the instincts the Jedi called dangerous were, in truth, the instincts of a born leader. The Jedi, Palpatine suggested, were trapped by their own rigid dogma, their hesitation costing the Republic lives. They sought to win the war without embracing the full power at their disposal. Anakin had seen the cost of that hesitation on the battlefield. Worlds abandoned, soldiers sacrificed, opportunities lost, because the Council feared to act. And in that space between what the Council demanded and what Anakin felt was necessary, Palpatine's influence deepened, each word a stone in the foundation of a new truth. They met often, sometimes in the Chancellor's private office high above, the city where the sprawl of Coruscant glittered like a sea of stars. The room was dim, the air warm, the sound of the war, the distant hum of ships, the faint thunder of Senate debates, muffled by heavy walls. Here, Palpatine told Anakin things no other would. He spoke of ancient Sith legends, not in the tones of warning that the Jedi used, but as histories, as lessons about the nature of power. He spoke of abilities beyond the reach of ordinary Jedi, powers that could bend the very currents of the Force to preserve life or end it. And most dangerously, he spoke of the one thing Anakin feared losing more than anything. Those he loved, whispers of death, had begun to haunt Anakin's sleep. Visions of Padmé's face, pale and still, her breath stilled by some unseen hand. They came without warning, flashes so vivid they felt more like memories than dreams. He told no one in the Order, for he already knew their answer: let go. But the Chancellor's answer was different. He spoke of ancient knowledge, of powers forbidden by the Jedi but preserved in secret by the Sith, the power to prevent death itself. It was not offered outright, not yet, but placed before Anakin like the scent of distant rain before a drought. Palpatine's voice was patient, never demanding, always planting seeds. He reminded Anakin of the times the Jedi had doubted him, the missions they had withheld from him, the promotions they had delayed. He contrasted this with his own unwavering trust, his public praise, the way he addressed Anakin in the Senate as if he were already among the Republic's greatest defenders. Slowly, subtly, Palpatine became more than a political ally. He became a confidant, the one voice that echoed Anakin's unspoken thoughts instead of trying to silence them. And in the deep places of Anakin's mind, the Force began to shift. He still saw himself as a Jedi, still fought for the Republic, still believed in the ideals he had sworn to uphold. But he also began to believe that perhaps the Council was not equipped to see the war through to its end. That perhaps there were truths too dangerous for them to face, truths he might be destined to carry alone. The serpent did not have to strike. It needed only to keep whispering until the prey no longer saw the fangs. Chapter 6. The night of the broken escape of the war had reached a fever pitch, a point where the galaxy seemed to tremble under the weight of its own exhaustion. Every star, system, every fleet, every commander was stretched to the breaking point, and yet the fighting only grew more desperate. On the city world of Coruscant, the Senate still clung to the illusion of control, debating laws and emergency powers, while the war burned ever closer to their own doorstep. But in the outer sectors, that control was already gone. Worlds fell into ruin, fleets were scattered, and entire populations vanished into the shadow of separatist occupation. The Clone Wars had always been brutal, but now they began to take on a different character, one of inevitability, as if the galaxy itself were leaning toward a single, irreversible conclusion. Above all of this, in the deep hours before dawn, Anakin Skywalker began to dream again. Not the ordinary dreams of soldiers haunted by battles past, but visions that seemed to carry the weight of the Force itself. In them, Padma stood before him in a haze of golden light that slowly bled into shadow. Her hands reached for him. Her voice called his name, but then the light faded, and her body collapsed into his arms, cold, breathless, gone. The dream never told him how, never told him why, but the end was always the same. She was gone, and he was powerless to save her. Each time he woke, the sound of her imagined last breath clung to him, heavier than any wound he had ever carried. It was in those sleepless hours that the Chancellor's voice returned to him, not as a command, not even as a direct offer, but as a thought that seemed to settle in his mind unbidden. There were powers the Jedi refused to use, powers the Sith had mastered long ago, powers that could prevent death, that could break the chains of fate itself. Palpatine had spoken of them before, but always in half-truths, as if testing whether Anakin was ready to hear the rest. And now, with each dream, Anakin found himself wanting to know more, willing to listen to what he once might have dismissed as dangerous. The war gave them reason to speak often. Officially, their meetings concerned strategies, military deployments, and Senate votes. But behind closed doors, the conversation wandered. They spoke of loyalty, of trust, of how the Republic's survival required not just armies, but vision. Vision unclouded by fear or indecision. Palpatine reminded Anakin of the Council's mistrust, of the times they had kept him at arm's length, even after his victories. He contrasted that with his own unwavering faith, painting himself as the only leader who truly saw Anakin's worth. And in the stillness of those meetings, the Chancellor's words began to feel less like advice and more like a truth Anakin had always known, but never dared to say aloud. That night, the sky over Coruscant broke. It was not a literal shattering, but the sudden eruption of violence as separatist forces made a bold, coordinated strike against the capital itself. The alarms came first, deep resonant tones that shook the city's towers, followed by the rising roar of engines as cut through the clouds. Turbolays of fire lit the sky in jagged flashes, turning the night into a storm of green and red. From the Jedi Temple to the Senate Rotunda, the entire city seemed to hold its breath as the battle descended upon it. Anakin was in the Chancellor's office when the first explosions shook the building. The two men stood at the great windows, watching the distant glow of burning ships as the Republic's fleets scrambled to respond. Palpatine did not look afraid. His expression was calm, almost measured, as if the attack were confirmation of something he had long predicted. "This is what hesitation brings," he said quietly. "If the Jedi had acted decisively months ago, this would not be happening." Anakin said nothing, but the words sank deep. The thought that the Jedi's restraint had cost lives Padme's life, perhaps, was one he could not easily push away. The battle raged through the night, and though the Republic forces eventually drove the attackers back, the cost was clear. Entire sectors of the city burned, and thousands were dead. The Senate, shaken and frightened, moved swiftly to grant the Chancellor even greater powers to direct the war. Palpatine accepted with solemn humility, but Anakin could see the faint satisfaction behind his eyes. This was the way the galaxy turned, the way trust was shifted from councils and committees to a single man who promised safety, and Anakin found himself wondering if that was truly such a bad thing. And yet, even as the city smoldered and the Senate prepared its next session, Anakin's thoughts kept returning to the dream. The night sky over Coruscant had been filled with fire, but in his mind's eye he still saw Padme's face fading into shadow. He had fought countless battles for the Republic, had defeated enemies the Jedi feared to face, but none of it mattered. If he could not save her, the Chancellor's words returned again, soft as a whisper in the dark. There are powers to stop death itself. The Jedi will not teach them to you, but I will. Chapter 7. The temple burns. The night began in silence. But it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of breath being drawn before a scream. The temple stood as it had for 1,000 years, its towers of stone and light piercing the skies of Coruscant, its banners whispering in the high winds. Inside, the great halls were filled with the soft hum of training sabers, the murmur of masters guiding Padawans, the ancient presence of the Force woven into the very walls. No one there imagined that before the next sunrise, those walls would be blackened, the banners ash, and the halls littered with the still bodies of its guardians and children. The first sign was the opening of the great doors, not in haste, not in panic, but in command. A figure stepped through, cloaked in darkness, flanked by soldiers in white armor, whose visors reflected nothing of the souls within. Their boots struck the polished floors in perfect rhythm, a sound so precise it felt like the ticking of a clock, counting down the final moments of an age. The Jedi who first saw them did not raise their weapons. They saw a man they knew, a hero of the Republic, a champion of battles past, a face that had once carried the promise of the prophecy itself. They saw Anakin Skywalker, but the man they saw no longer bore that name. The boy from Tatooine had burned away, replaced by something colder, something sharpened to a perfect, merciless edge. The Emperor had whispered a new name into his ear. Darth Vader, and that name was already heavy with blood. It clung to him like a shadow, and in its weight there was no trace of the desert suns, no trace of laughter, no trace of light. The first blade ignited, not in greeting, but in judgment. It burned blue, as it always had, but now it was turned against those it once protected. The clones opened fire in perfect unison, their bolts slicing through the air in brilliant streams of red. Masters fell where they stood, caught in moments of shock they had no time to shake away. Padawans scrambled, calling out for help that would never come, their training sabers clashing weakly against the tide. The great archives caught fire where stray blasts struck, ancient scrolls and holocrons bursting into flames. The knowledge of centuries consumed in moments. The halls became a battlefield of ghosts in the making. Jedi fought with the fury of the cornered, their movements desperate yet graceful, their final stands illuminated by the glow of their weapons. But they were fighting more than soldiers. They were fighting betrayal itself, and betrayal cuts deeper than any blade. The clones had been their brothers in arms through war after war, yet now those same hands pulled triggers without hesitation, without pause, without remorse. In the highest chamber, younglings huddled together, their small eyes wide, the smell of burning stone filling their lungs. The door slid open, and in its frame stood the tall figure in black. One of the children stepped forward, trusting still, asking for guidance. The answer came not in words, but in the hiss of a blade. History would never record their final cries, but the Force would. It would carry their voices forever, echoing in the places where light once lived. Outside, smoke began to curl into the night sky, spiraling upward like the last prayers of the fallen. The city below saw the glow and did not understand. To them, the temple was eternal, untouchable. But as the towers burned, as the statues of ancient Jedi cracked and toppled, the truth became clear. An era was ending, not with quiet dissolution, but with fire and steel. Vader walked through the ruin he had made, the heat of flames brushing against the edges of his cloak, the smell of scorched flesh and stone heavy in the air. His expression did not change. The screams around him did not slow his pace. Every step was part of the Emperor's will. Every stroke of his blade another stone pulled from the foundation of the Jedi Order. In that moment, the prophecy was not a promise of balance. It was a death sentence for the Guardians of Light. By the time the sun began to rise over Coruscant, the temple was no longer a place of learning, nor a sanctuary of the Force. It was a tomb built not of stone alone, but of shattered trust, broken oaths, and the charred remains of 1,000 dreams. The banners were gone, the statues shattered, the light extinguished, and among the ashes walked a man with no past, only a future. Forged in darkness, the boy named Anakin Skywalker was gone. Only Darth Vader remained. Chapter 8. Birth of the Black Armor. The duel had ended in fire. Not the cleansing fire of renewal, but the fire that devours everything it touches, leaving only blackened bone and silence in its wake. On the shores of Mustafar, the air itself burned, and the ground split open to reveal rivers of molten rock flowing like the veins of a dying world. Here, amidst the roar of the planet's molten heart, the last vestiges of Anakin Skywalker were consumed. Obi-Wan Kenobi had left him there, his brother, his friend, his fallen star, lying broken on the ash-strewn slope. The heat had already begun to melt flesh from bone. the flames hungrily pulling at the man who had once been the Chosen One. Anakin's screams tore through the choking air, each one carrying hatred enough to pierce the sky. Hatred for his enemy, hatred for his master, hatred for himself. The Force shuddered. Something ancient and terrible stirred in the dark, drawn by his suffering. When the Emperor arrived, the world seemed to bow to him. His shuttle cut through, the smoke like a blade descending to the scorched landing pad. He walked with no hurry. He did not need to hurry. The victory was already his. In the distance, the figure that had been Skywalker lay twitching, barely clinging to life, his limbs severed, his eyes clouded with pain and rage. The Emperor knelt, and for the first time, Anakin looked into the face of his true master as an equal in darkness. "You shall be remade," Sidious promised. The words were not comfort. They were a command, a covenant sealed in agony. The journey back to Coruscant was a blur of shadow and steel. Anakin drifted in and out of consciousness. Each breath a jagged struggle, each heartbeat a drumbeat in the march toward his rebirth. His body was destroyed, but his will was unbroken. Every moment of pain only deepened his surrender to the dark side, until nothing of the boy who had raced through Tatooine sands remained. In the Emperor's private medical facility, a chamber, awaited not for healing, but for transformation. The droids descended on him, their arms bristling with instruments of fire and blade. Limbs were replaced with machinery of black durasteel and carbon fiber sinew. His breath failed, and tubes were forced down his throat, sensors drilled into his skull. Where flesh had been burned away, the machines grafted armor, sealing it not only to his body, but to his fate. Piece by piece, the man disappeared beneath the shell. The legs were long and mechanical, the arms powerful but cold, every movement accompanied by the whisper of servos. His chest was covered by an armored life support plate, its surface gleaming under the white surgical lights. The breath came back to him, but not as it once had. Now it was a rasping mechanical draw, the sound of life sustained by the machine, not the body. The helmet was the final act. It descended slowly, as if the galaxy itself were holding its breath. Inside, the darkness closed around him completely. The lenses locked into place, filtering the world into shades of red. The seal hissed, and then the sound. The first mechanical breath, deep, relentless, eternal, Anakin Skywalker, was gone. The machine that rose from the table was Darth Vader. Sidious stood before his creation, the black figure towering, the very air around him bending under the weight of his presence. Vader's first steps were heavy, yet precise. His voice, when it came, was a distorted echo of the man he had been, a voice made for command, for fear. It was here, in this cold, sterile chamber, that the Emperor's true apprentice was born. Not on Tatooine, not in the Jedi Temple, not on the lava banks of Mustafar, but here, bound in armor, sealed away from light, condemned to live every moment. In the prison of his own body, every breath would remind him of his master. Every movement would remind him of his failure. Sidious had not merely saved his life. He had taken it, reshaped it, and claimed it entirely. And so, the galaxy would never again see the face of the Chosen One. It would see only the mask. The black mask that would haunt systems, extinguish rebellions, and stand as the symbol of the Emperor's will. From that day on, there was no man beneath it, only the shadow. Chapter 9. The long night of the Empire years turned to decades. The galaxy's map grew darker with each passing cycle, its borders sealed beneath the black banners of the Emperor. World by world, system by system, the stars themselves seemed to bow to the shadow. Some knelt willingly, seduced by the promise of order. Others burned, reduced to ash, as examples to those who still clung to hope. It was not merely conquest, it was erasure. The Empire devoured history as hungrily as it devoured planets. Old names vanished from charts, rebel songs from memory. The light did not die in a single strike. It was smothered, breath by breath, until even whispers of resistance grew dangerous, and at the center of it all was the figure in black dot. His armor was both prison and throne. It encased him in steel and machinery, sealing away the man who once breathed freely beneath twin suns. It weighed upon his every movement, reminded him of every wound, every failure, every choice that had led him into the cold grasp of the Emperor. Yet it also made him a symbol, not just to the galaxy, but to himself. The hiss of his breath was the beat of the Empire's heart. The faceless mask was a crown of terror, and no citizen, soldier, or senator could look upon it without knowing the truth. This was the will of the Emperor made flesh. The galaxy forgot the boy. It forgot the name that had once been spoken in hope, forgotten the smile, the laughter, the dreams of freedom and flight. Now there was only the shadow, the executioner whose word was law, whose hand was final judgment. The years wore down even memory, until for many the boy had never existed at all. But the shadow remembered, not always, and not without pain. Sometimes the memories came unbidden, in the edge of a dream or the reflection of a field. He would recall the scent of desert air after a storm, the thrill of racing across the dune sea, the warmth of a mother's touch. Yet these were embers, and embers, he told himself, were meant to die. He was the Emperor's right hand, the blade that cut where words failed. He carried out purges that spanned the outer rim and struck deep into the core. He hunted the scattered remnants of the Jedi, one by one, extinguishing their light before it could kindle again. Entire worlds learned that their survival depended on their silence. And so silence spread, a silence that lasted years, then decades. Still, the galaxy was never entirely quiet. Whispers of dissent persisted, born of stubborn hearts and old wounds. Cells of rebels formed in the shadows, passing coded messages from ship to ship, planet to planet. Some were crushed before they could act. Others lingered, elusive, like sparks caught in the wind. The shadow hunted them all, yet for every fire stamped out, another flickered somewhere new. And in the Emperor's throne room, time moved differently. The ruler of the galaxy did not measure victory in years, but in lifetimes. Each fallen enemy was another stone in the foundation of his reign. He did not fear rebellion. He fed on it, using it to tighten his grip. And through it all, his servant, the man in black, stood at his side, loyal, unyielding. Bound by chains he could neither see nor break. There was no dawn for the Empire, only the long night. Stars rose and fell in the same cold rhythm. Generations were born under its rule, knowing no other life. To children in the core, the Emperor's face was as eternal as the sun's. To those in the outer rim, the shadow's breathing was the sound of inevitable death. Some worlds counted the years since liberation, others counted the years since they were conquered, but all of them counted years in darkness. And yet, there are things even the longest night cannot kill. In hidden places, in the glow of a campfire, in the secret teaching of a parent to a child, old stories were told. Stories of a time before the Empire. of warriors who defended the weak, of peace that stretched from star to star, of a republic that, for all its flaws, was not ruled by fear. These were not histories to the young, they were legends. But legends have power. The shadow could not hear them. He walked among the stars as a thing apart, seeing only what the Emperor allowed him to see. Yet deep within the currents of the Force, faint tremors began to stir. In distant lands, seeds were being sown. Not yet trees, not yet ready to bloom, but growing all the same. And though he could not yet name it, a part of him felt the change, like a shift in the wind before a storm. For now the night reigned, but even the longest night has an end, and the shadow's reign, though it seemed endless, was already moving toward its moment of truth. The galaxy slept uneasily under a sky without sunrise. The boy was gone. The man was gone. There was only Darth Vader, and Darth Vader was unassailable. For now, Chapter 10. The hand of the Emperor of the Galaxy had long since learned to fear the black-clad figure. But fear was never his only purpose. Fear was a tool, one of many. The Emperor had forged him not only as a weapon, but as an extension of his will, a shadow given form. He was not merely soldier, not merely servant. He was enforcer, hunter, executioner, the hand of the Emperor. No decree was beyond his reach. When the Emperor spoke, the shadow moved. His missions carried him to every corner of the galaxy, to the glittering halls of the core worlds, where senators whispered behind jeweled masks, and to the dust-choked outposts of the Outer Rim, where law was whatever the Empire's boots. Crushed underfoot, he brought with him not only the might of the Imperial fleet, but the certainty that resistance meant annihilation. He scoured the stars for survivors of the light. The Jedi, though broken, had not been completely erased. Some had fled to worlds far beyond the old trade routes. Others hid among the very people they once protected, masking their presence in the Force, changing names, burying sabers deep beneath stone and soil. But to the hand of the Emperor, such concealment was only a delay. He could feel them in the current, faint but undeniable, the flicker of a candle in an ocean of shadow. And one by one, those candles were snuffed out. The hunt was not swift. It was patient. Years passed between the discovery of a Jedi's trail and the moment the shadow finally stood before them. He did not waste time with mercy. He offered no second chances, no speeches of persuasion. The Emperor's enemies did not deserve words, only silence. Some Jedi faced him with defiance, choosing death over surrender. Others, worn down by exile and despair, fought without the strength they once commanded. But in each duel, no matter how the battle raged, the outcome was certain. He had no equal in the lightsaber's dance, no hesitation in striking the killing blow. The Emperor's will was absolute, yet the hunt was never only for Jedi. The Empire's enemies wore many faces, smugglers who ferried contraband for rebel cells, senators who dared to speak against imperial decrees, entire cultures that refused to bend to the new order. Each became a target. Each learned that the hand of the Emperor could arrive without warning, his very presence sealing their fate. Some planets were broken through war, others through politics, the shadow's visit marking the beginning of their slow suffocation. He could speak when needed, his voice deep, cold, and final, but often silence was more powerful. The sight of him, the sound of that breathing, could break the will of those who had sworn to resist. And still, he was not free. The galaxy saw him as unstoppable, but his power was chained. Every command came from the throne. Every step was measured against the Emperor's vision. He was the hand, but the mind was not his own. And though he did not voice it, the chains weighed on him. The Emperor understood this. It was why he fed him enemies without end, to keep the shadows. Focus outward, never inward. It was why he granted him command of fleets and legions, to make him feel the illusion of autonomy. And it was why, above all else, he forbade him from dwelling on the past. The past was weakness. The future was the Emperor's alone to shape. Yet the Force whispered differently. In quiet moments, when missions were done and hyperspace stretched endlessly beyond the viewport, he felt currents beyond the Emperor's design. Not visions, not yet, but hints. A sensation that the galaxy's fate was shifting, that threads unseen were tightening. He ignored them as he had been taught, but the whispers did not fade. His task remained, ensure no one could rise. To challenge his master, that meant more than killing Jedi. It meant crushing hope wherever it bloomed. A rebel uprising on Roltier crushed. A network of dissidents on Lothal scattered. An influential senator secretly funding resistance cells, publicly executed after a trial whose outcome was known before it began. The Emperor trusted him with such missions because he knew they would be done without hesitation. The Shadow's loyalty was not in question. It had been carved into him, bone deep, in fire and loss. And so the galaxy learned that, to defy the Emperor was to invite the hand's arrival, and once the hand closed, it never let go. Still, there were moments, rare, fleeting, when the hunt brought him face to face with something he could not entirely destroy. Not a person, not a place, but a feeling, a reminder. The laughter of a child in a marketplace, the sight of twin suns setting on a distant horizon, the memory of flying, unbound, with nothing but sky ahead. These moments passed quickly, like cracks in stones sealed before they could spread, but they left a mark. The Emperor did not notice, or perhaps he did, and allowed it, certain that such moments could never grow into anything dangerous. The chains still held. The shadow was still his. And so the missions continued, each one another thread in the great web of control. But webs, like chains, can fray. The galaxy was vast, and even the most loyal servant could not see all its corners at once. Somewhere, beyond the edge of Imperial vision, the Force was moving. New life was stirring, and the hand of the Emperor, though he could not yet see it, was moving toward the moment when his hunt would turn inward. For now, there was only the task and the silence between stars. The hand moved, and the galaxy obeyed. Chapter 11. The sun of the desert destiny does not vanish. It waits. It sleeps in the deep folds of time, as silent as stone, as patient as the tide. Empires may rise and fall above it, yet it endures, unbroken, unseen. Inevitable, far from the Emperor's throne, far from the burning centers of power, there lay a world of dust and heat. Its skies stretched endless and pale, its horizon broken only by jagged mesas and seas of sand. Here, twin suns rose and set in unison, casting long shadows over dunes older than the Republic itself. It was a harsh place, a place where survival was not given but earned, where water was worth more than gold, and where every life was shaped by the desert's hand. It was here, beneath those twin suns, that a boy was born, not in chains, not in fear, but in hope. His birth went unnoticed by the galaxy. No imperial proclamation marked the day. No fleet sailed to greet him. Yet the Force stirred all the same, like a deep current rising to the surface. It was not loud, not yet, only a whisper, a pulse that rippled outward from this forgotten corner of space. He was not born into greatness. His family was humble, their lives defined by the rhythms of sand and sun. Yet he carried something. In his blood, an inheritance older than empires, older than war. It was the echo of a prophecy the galaxy had nearly forgotten, a prophecy thought fulfilled, or broken. The prophecy stirred again. The Emperor did not know. The shadow, the hand who hunted the light, did not know. Those who might have understood were scattered, in hiding, their voices too faint to reach the desert, but the Force knew, and the Force watches over its own. The boy's earliest days were simple. He learned to walk on sand, to drink sparingly, to work beneath the heat without complaint. He played among the moisture vaporators that dotted the land, their silent towers catching the breath of the sky. The desert taught him patience, resilience, and how to find life in places that seemed barren. And the desert remembers. It remembers every step of those who came before, the wanderers, the raiders, the warriors, the slaves. It had seen this before, the birth of a child who would change the stars. The boy did not know this, but the wind that carried the scent of far-off storms seemed to know his name before he spoke it. Fate was not idle. Even as the boy grew, events in distant systems moved toward him. The Emperor's hold was strong, but not absolute. Rebellion whispered in back rooms and shadowed hangars. Smugglers ferried messages hidden in crates of spice. Across the galaxy, the pieces of an unseen game shifted, and though no one yet saw it, the boy was one of those pieces. His childhood was marked not by privilege, but by longing. He dreamed of the stars the way others dreamed of rain. He would watch the freighters that passed high overhead, tiny specks against the blue, wondering where they had come from, where they were going, and whether he would ever see more than the horizon. It is in such dreams that destiny plants its seeds. The Force does not always choose the mighty. It chooses those who can carry the weight it demands, those whose hearts will hold fast when storms come. And so it chose him, quietly, as the twin suns turned in their endless sky. The galaxy at large remained unaware. The Emperor's attention was elsewhere, fixed on rooting out the last embers of the Jedi. His hand was far away, hunting the light across frozen wastelands and jungle worlds. No one thought to look to this desert, to this boy whose name had not yet been spoken in prophecy, and yet the connection was already there, invisible, unbreakable. The same current of the Force that flowed through the shadow flowed through the boy. It was the bond of blood, though neither knew it, a thread spun long before his birth, waiting for the moment when it would draw them together. The desert kept its secrets well. It hid the boy from those who might have destroyed him. It tempered him with heat and wind, taught him the value of silence, the need to listen. And in that silence, the Force whispered, not in words, but in feelings, in instincts, in dreams that lingered long after waking. One day, the suns would set on the desert for him. One day, he would leave its dunes behind and step into the storm that had been building across the galaxy. But for now, he was safe. For now, destiny was content to wait, watching him grow. For even in the heart of the Empire's long night, there are places the darkness cannot reach, not yet, and in one such place, a boy of the desert was learning to breathe, to dream, to hope. The prophecy had begun to stir, and the galaxy, though it did not yet know it, was beginning to turn. Chapter 12. The Call Across. Bloodfather and son met as enemies. They did not know it at first, not fully. One knew only that a young pilot had emerged from nowhere, bold enough to strike at the Empire. The other knew only that a figure in black armor hunted him across the stars. Their names, their histories, their blood, all of it remained hidden beneath the masks of war, and yet the Force knew. The Force is not bound by ignorance. It does not require names or faces to see the truth. It saw the thread that bound them, the line of destiny that had been drawn before the boy's birth. It had watched as that thread wound its way across years of silence and shadow, waiting for the moment when it would tighten into a snare. The snare was closing. The son fought with courage far beyond his years. He had grown up in the heat of the desert, learning resilience from the land itself, but now he was tempered in the fire of rebellion. The Empire called him a criminal, a terrorist, a threat to the new order. To those who flew beside him, he was a leader, though he bore the title reluctantly. His skill in battle was rare enough to draw the eye of friend and foe alike. The father saw him first through the lens of war. Reports came of a pilot who had destroyed the Empire's greatest weapon, a feat no fleet or army had achieved. In the Emperor's throne room, such defiance was not merely disobedience. It was prophecy fulfilled in reverse, an echo of an old fear. The Hand was dispatched to hunt him down, to bring him before the throne alive. If possible, their first encounters were brief, violent, and incomplete. A clash in the void, ships dancing between laser fire and debris. The son fought to survive. The father fought to capture. Neither succeeded fully, but each left the other marked. The boy began to feel something strange in the presence of the armored figure. Not just fear, but a pull, a gravity that seemed to reach for him across the distance. And the father, though he did not understand it, felt a flicker of familiarity in the boy's defiance. The Force wove its invisible threads tighter. In dreams, the boy saw flashes, a shadow standing in fire, a mask shattering in light, twin suns fading into darkness. In the stillness of meditation, the father felt a presence he could not name, a warmth that stirred long-buried embers. Both dismissed these visions, telling themselves they were nothing more than distractions. But the Force does not send distractions. The Emperor, too, began to see the pattern. He was a master of manipulation, one who read the currents of the Force as a sailor reads the tide. He saw in the boy not only a threat, but an opportunity, a weapon, a key to replacing the Hand should the Hand grow weary or disobedient. The Emperor whispered to his servant of the boy's strength, of his potential, feeding the fire of the hunt. And to the boy, the Emperor remained a distant shadow, one whose true designs were hidden behind war and fear. The war between father and son deepened. Their battles grew closer, their duels more personal. Lightsabers met for the first time, blue against crimson, the clash of light and shadow ringing across metal corridors and over the roar of distant engines. The boy fought with passion, the father with precision, and neither realized that they moved in patterns shaped by the same hand, learned from the same unseen teacher. The Force strained at its leash. It wanted the truth revealed. But timing is its own weapon, and it waited for the moment when revelation would cut deepest. For now, it allowed the game to continue, each side believing themselves separate, each convinced that victory would be measured in survival or defeat. Yet there was another victory being sought, one neither could see. The Emperor's victory. He cared little whether the boy killed the father or the father killed the boy. What mattered was that one would fall, and the survivor would belong to him. It was a perfect trap, one that had worked countless times before. But prophecy has sharp edges, and the Emperor, for all his cunning, did not realize that he was also walking into it. The boy returned to his rebellion, to missions and victories and losses. The father returned to his emperor, to orders and hunts and silence. But the pull between them did not fade. It grew stronger, an unspoken call that neither could answer and neither could escape. The call across blood. It was older than both of them, older than the Empire, older than the war. It was the Force itself, drawing them toward the moment when everything would be laid bare. And in that moment, one truth would be clear. Enemies can be kin, and blood can bind more fiercely than any chain. Chapter 13. Shadows on the Bespin. Sky clouds drifted like slow rivers over the floating city of Bespin. Sunlight poured across white towers and walkways, turning the air to gold. But beneath the beauty was unease, the kind that gathers before a storm. The city was built on promises of neutrality, of wealth drawn from the gas mines below, but even here the shadow of the Empire could fall, and it had fallen. The boy came seeking refuge. His rebellion had suffered a blow, and he needed allies, repairs, a place to breathe. The city seemed to offer it, smiling hosts, old friends, the comfort of safe halls. But the galaxy is rarely so kind. The corridors hid watchers, the doors were not truly his own, and the welcome was a mask. The trap had already been set. The father was here. The hand of the Emperor had arrived before him, his presence negotiated through fear and leverage. Deals were struck in whispers. Promises were made under the weight of his breathing. And now the city floated in shadow, though its towers still shone in the light. The meeting was inevitable. It began with a duel, lightsabers igniting in the quiet of the carbon freezing chamber, crimson and blue painting the walls in opposite fires. The hiss of steam rose between strikes. The floor rang with each step, each blow, each retreat. The boy fought fiercely, his movements quick, unpredictable, born of desperation. The father pressed forward with precision. Every strike meant to end the fight, not to prolong it. But Bespin's sky is a place of illusions. From the walkways and platforms, the clouds stretched endless, hiding the true depths below. One wrong step could send a body falling into nothing, swallowed by the gas and the storms. In such a place, victory and loss could come in a single heartbeat. The battle moved higher, across narrow bridges and open ledges. Wind tore at their clothes, carrying the sound of their blades out into the sky. The boy's strength began to falter. The father's strikes grew heavier, more relentless, and then, with a clean, brutal cut, the boy's weapon was gone. Another strike, and pain exploded through him as the blade severed his hand. He staggered, cornered, gasping. The father did not strike again. Instead, he spoke. It was not a threat, not an order. It was a truth. I am your father. The words struck harder than any blow. The boy's mind reeled, every memory, every assumption shattering at once. His enemy, the figure in black who had hunted him, maimed him, sought to deliver him to the Emperor, was his blood. The truth twisted the very ground beneath his feet. The father pressed on, offering not death, but a place beside him. Together they could overthrow the Emperor. Together they could rule the galaxy as father and son. It was not mercy, it was temptation, the kind the dark side wears so well. Power, legacy, vengeance, all wrapped in the voice of kinship. The boy's heart was torn. He had dreamed of his father once, a distant figure lost to time. He had imagined him noble, brave, perhaps even a hero. Now that dream lay in ruin, replaced by the reality of the man before him, a man who had killed, conquered, and crushed the galaxy under the Emperor's will. The choice was clear, yet it was agony. Join him and betray everything the boy had fought for. Refuse and face the fall, perhaps literally, into the clouds below. The father reached for him. The wind howled around them. The boy stepped back and let go. He fell, vanishing into the white abyss, trusting the Force, trusting that death would not claim him yet. The father watched him disappear, the words still echoing between them. The bond had been revealed, but not completed. The Emperor would not be pleased above the clouds. The sun dipped toward the horizon, casting the sky in deep orange and crimson. Shadows stretched long over the city. The boy had escaped, but he carried a wound deeper than the one on his arm, a wound of truth, and wounds, like truths, do not fade easily. The game had changed. The Force had shifted. Father and son were no longer strangers, and from this moment onward, every choice they made would be shaped by the knowledge of who they truly were. Chapter 14. The Emperor's web. The Emperor had always seen himself as a spider. He sat in the dark center of his web, a throne of black marble and shadow, feeling every vibration, every tremor across the galaxy. Threads of fear, ambition, and greed stretched from world to world, system to system, all of them leading back to him. It was a web spun over decades, woven with lies and half-truths, bound together by the promise of power and the threat of annihilation. The boy was now caught in it. Bespin had changed everything. The truth was no longer hidden. Father and son knew what bound them. But to the Emperor, this was not a threat. It was opportunity. The dark side thrives on bonds, so long as those bonds can be twisted, poisoned, made to serve its will. His plan was simple, elegant, perfect in his eyes. The boy would kill the father, taking his place as the Emperor's new apprentice, or the father would kill the boy, cementing his loyalty through the destruction of his own blood. Either way, the line of succession would be secured, and the dark would endure. The Emperor began to weave tighter. He reached out to the boy, not with fleets or armies, but with whispers, dreams heavy with shadow, promises of knowledge, strength, and purpose. He spoke of a galaxy that could be remade, of an end to war, of peace through absolute control. To the boy, these visions were half nightmare, half temptation. He told himself he rejected them, but temptation has a way of leaving a mark. To the father, the Emperor spoke differently. He praised him for his strength, his service, his loyalty, but always with the faintest undertone of warning. The boy was dangerous, he said, too strong, too reckless, too unshaped. Left alive, he could become a threat not only to the Emperor, but to the father himself. This was poison wrapped in counsel, a slow drip meant to erode certainty. The web tightened further when the Emperor learned that the boy's compassion for his friends was his greatest weakness. He arranged events to exploit it, allowing danger to grow in one place so that the boy would come to answer it. Dangling bait to draw both father and son into the same corner of the galaxy. The father felt it too. The hunt resumed, but now it was more than duty. The father wanted the boy alive, not for the Emperor, but for himself. The duel on Bespin had awakened something that had been buried for decades, a flicker of something dangerously close to hope. He told himself it was strategy. He told himself it was power. But in the deep places he avoided, he knew it was blood calling to blood. The Emperor counted on this. He counted on love as much as hate, because in his view both were weaknesses, and he would turn either to his advantage. He had done so countless times before. Why should this be any different? But prophecy is not a web, it is a blade, and a blade can cut the hand that wields it. The Force had been moving long before the Emperor's first lie, shaping currents he could not fully see. The Chosen One's destiny had not ended in fire on the banks of a lava river. It had only shifted, waiting for the moment when the last chain would break. The Emperor's web was strong, but prophecy moves in places webs cannot hold. For now, though the trap was perfect, the boy's friends were in peril. The father was in pursuit. The boy was rushing toward the heart of danger, and the heart of the danger was the Emperor himself, from his throne. The Emperor smiled. Every step they took brought them deeper into his design. Every choice they made narrowed the path before them. He did not yet see the edge of the blade, nor hear the faint sound of it being drawn, for in the very act of tightening his web, the Emperor had ensured that father and son would meet again, not apart, but together, in the same room, before the same throne. And when that moment came, the galaxy would hold its breath. Chapter 15. The Last Duel, the Second Death. Star hung in the cold black like an unfinished crown of metal and shadow. It was a thing half built, yet already steeped in death, a throne, room for the end of empires, a place where prophecy and power would meet in the silent heart of space. In its great chamber, the Emperor sat upon his dark throne, a spider at the center of his web. His eyes were the color of old storms, and his voice was the whisper of every shadow in the galaxy. He had brought them both here, father and son, not for peace, not for reconciliation, but for a final lesson. He would turn the boy, and in doing so, destroy the man. The father stood cloaked in black armor, more shadow than flesh. His breath was the slow rhythm of a machine, each exhale a memory of chains. He was the weapon of the Emperor, the one called Darth Vader. Yet in the chambers of his mind, something stirred, a memory of sand, of a boy's hands building dreams. From dust, the sun stood in the light of the great windows, the stars behind him like silent witnesses. His tunic was dark, but his eyes carried the stubborn fire of the light. Luke Skywalker had come to redeem his father, though the galaxy would have called it folly. He had walked into the lair of the Sith, not as a conqueror, but as a son. The Emperor smiled. His words were knives wrapped in silk. He spoke of power. He spoke of destiny. He spoke of the boy's friends dying even now in the void above Endor. And with each word, he planted seeds of fury in the soil of Luke's heart. The duel began not with rage, but with a test, the green blade of the son against the red blade of the father, humming in the throne room's vast silence. Sparks danced from the clash of their weapons, brief stars dying in the air between them. Vader's strikes were heavy, unyielding, the weight of years and chains behind them. Luke's counters were quick, his movements guided not only by skill, but by a desperate hope that each parry was not against his father, but against the chains that bound him. But the Emperor's voice was never silent. From his throne, he poured venom into the air, daring the boy to kill, to claim his place at the side of darkness. Vader pressed harder, his blows testing the son's resolve, his words probing for weakness. Luke's control wavered when his sister's name passed Vader's lips. The knowledge that she, too, carried the Skywalker blood ignited a storm inside him. With a sudden, furious strength, Luke attacked, his strikes no longer measured, but driven by a fire the Emperor had long waited to see. The tide turned. The son's blade battered the father's defenses. The rhythm of breath behind the mask grew heavier. Step by step, Luke drove him back until the crimson saber was torn from Vader's grasp, clattering to the floor like a broken oath. The father fell to his knees beneath the green glow of the son's blade. One more strike, one final swing, and the throne would be his. The Emperor's laughter filled the chamber, high and terrible. Yes, strike him down and take your father's place at my side. Luke looked down at the man who had once been Anakin Skywalker. He saw not the black mask, not the armored giant, but the shadow of the boy who had once dreamed of racing the suns. His grip loosened, the blade dimmed, and in that moment the sun turned not to hate, but to mercy. He cast his saber aside. Its clatter echoed like the breaking of a chain. The Emperor's smile curdled into a snarl. The boy had chosen defiance, and so the dark would answer. Chapter 16. The Death of Darth Vader. Lightning crowned the Emperor. Not the gentle flash of storms on a summer horizon, but the searing, unnatural fire of the dark side made manifest. From his withered hands leapt rivers of living agony, each bolt tearing through the air with the scream of a dying star. They found the boy where he stood, unarmed, his saber cast aside in defiance. His body arched under the assault, his cries swallowed by the throne room's vastness. The air burned with the scent of scorched cloth and flesh. The Emperor's laughter was the sound of a galaxy in chains. This was his truth, not politics, not promises, but domination. He fed on the boy's pain, savoring every heartbeat of surrender that it might yield. Vader watched from his knees, his saber lost, his body a fortress of steel and servos. The red glow of the Emperor's power reflected in the black lenses of his mask. For years, decades, he had been the hand that delivered this same suffering. He had broken worlds. He had slaughtered innocents. He had knelt at the feet of this same master, believing that this was strength. But the sound of the boy's agony was not like the screams of his enemies. It was the sound of his son, the one who had faced him without hatred, the one who had looked upon him and still called him father. The Emperor's voice rose in triumph, a serpent coiled in ecstasy. Now, young Skywalker, you will die. The boy fell to the ground beneath the onslaught, his strength ebbing. His body convulsed as the lightning coursed through him again and again, and something broke inside the black-armored giant. Not a wire, not a servo, but a chain, for all the power of the dark side. The Emperor had never understood the bond between father and son. He had thought it a weakness to be exploited. But in this final hour, it became the one thing stronger than the will of the Sith. Vader rose. The servos in his legs screamed in protest. Circuits overloaded, sparks blooming beneath the plates of his armor. Pain tore through the machine, but the man beneath it rose all the same. For a heartbeat, the Emperor did not see the movement. He was too deep in his cruelty, too lost in the tide of his own power. Then the shadow loomed. Vader moved without his saber, without the precision of a duel. His strength was raw, driven not by technique, but by something purer, something the dark side had tried and failed to kill. He seized the Emperor in both hands. Lightning spilled from the Sith Lord's body into Vader's armor, crawling over the plates like living chains of fire. The smell of burning circuits filled the air. The Emperor's cry was no longer laughter. It was rage, the rage of a master betrayed. The lightning turned inward, striking both of them. Every bolt carved deeper into the armor, into the man, into the flesh that had been hidden for so long. Vader did not stop. He carried the Emperor toward the vast pit at the chamber's heart. The bolts ripped into his chest. The machine could endure no more, but the man beneath it did not fall. In those final steps, Anakin Skywalker returned, not the boy from Tatooine, not the Jedi Knights of the Clone Wars, but something greater, the Chosen One. With one last surge, he cast the Emperor into the abyss. The lightning faded into the pit's depths, its echoes swallowed by the hum of the Death Star's vast machinery dot, and then silence. Smoke curled from the wounds in Vader's armor. Each breath was a ragged, uneven battle. He staggered beneath, the weight of his own body, his strength draining like water from a shattered vessel. But where the Emperor's shadow had been, there was only empty air. The prophecy had taken form. The Sith were no more, yet the price was written in the faltering rhythm of his breath. Chapter 17. The maskfuls the battle above Endor raged. The second Death Star shuddered under the assault of rebel fire. Flames bloomed in the corridors, like sudden dawns, and the air trembled with the groan of dying metal. But in the Emperor's throne room, all of that was far away. Here there was only the slow, heavy breathing of a dying man. The boy knelt beside him. No, the son knelt beside the father. Vader lay slumped against the rail, the weight of his armor no longer a weapon, but a prison too heavy to bear. Smoke curled from the seams of the black plates. Sparks whispered out of torn cables. The once imposing mask, that unblinking face of steel, was now nothing more than a shell. For the man inside, Luke's hands trembled. He wanted to carry him. He wanted to run. But there was no running left. Vader's voice came low, each word dragged from somewhere deep beneath the rasp of the respirator. Help me. Take this mask off. Luke's eyes widened. But you'll die. The answer was quiet, almost gentle. Nothing can stop that now. There was no fear in it, only acceptance. A man who had walked the long road of darkness was ready, at last, to lay it down. Luke hesitated only a moment more. His fingers found the clasps, the hidden locks that had bound the mask to the man for decades. The seals broke with a hiss, releasing. The stale breath of the machine. Slowly, carefully, he lifted the mask away. Beneath it was not the monster the galaxy feared. There was no nightmare of steel, no glowing eyes of the dark side. There was only a face, pale, worn, lined with years of pain. The skin was weathered like the surface of an old stone, but the eyes remembered the desert and the light. For the first time in decades, Anakin Skywalker looked upon his son with his own eyes. He smiled not the cold curl of Darth Vader, but the soft, tired smile of a father seeing what he had always hoped to see. Now, go, my son, leave me. Luke shook his head. I'll not leave you here. I've got to save you. Anakin's breath shuddered. You already have. Outside, the Death Star groaned as its heart began to tear apart. But inside this quiet corner of the galaxy, the war was already over. Father and son had found each other again, not in victory, not in triumph, but in truth. Anakin's gaze did not turn to the burning skies or the dying station. It rested on Luke. His last sight was not the Emperor's throne, not the battlefield, not the face of his enemies, but his son, and the twin suns that lived within him. The mask lay forgotten on the floor, its empty eyes staring upward. The man who had worn it was gone, and in that moment, so too was Darth Vader. Chapter 18. The sand that remembers, still the holocron closes. The voice falls silent. Yet silence is not the same as ending, for the Force does not end. It has no final chapter, no last breath. The tide may recede from the shore, but the sea remains. And in the great ocean of the Force, shadows move still. The Chosen One fulfilled the prophecy. The Sith were broken, their line shattered in the throne room above. Ender, the Emperor, was gone, his black will cast into the void. The apprentice was gone, his armor and mask left behind like the husk of a long-dead creature. The galaxy, at last, could begin to breathe again. But prophecy is not peace. It had never promised peace, only balance. And balance is a shifting thing, a scale that trembles with every choice made in light and shadow alike. The Jedi knew this once, long ago. The Sith twisted it, believing that balance meant the dominance of the dark. But the Force is older than their wars, older than their creeds. On the forest moon, the fire burned bright. Its flames reached upward into the night, carrying sparks into the stars. The armor that had been Darth Vader was given to the pyre. The black plates cracked in the heat. The mask, that cold, expressionless face the galaxy had learned to fear, melted into the embers until it was only smoke and memory. Luke stood alone by the flames. He did not think of battles or politics, of fleets and empires. He thought of a boy on a desert world, dreaming of the stars. He thought of a Jedi Knight leading men into war. He thought of a father who had been lost, and then, in the end, had been found again. The night air whispered through the trees. In its quiet song, he felt something, a presence. Not heavy, not oppressive, but warm. And there, in the glow of the fire, he saw them. Obi-Wan, smiling as he had in life. Yoda, small and ancient, his eyes bright as the sun's. And beside them, a man Luke had never truly seen until now. Tall, strong, his robes the simple garb of a Jedi, his face lined not by pain, but by wisdom. Anakin Skywalker, the father he had saved. Luke's heart swelled, and for a moment the galaxy seemed whole. But the Force is a river, and rivers never stop moving. Somewhere, far beyond Ender, other shadows stirred. Whispers of the dark side clung to forgotten places in the ruins of temples, in the unlit corners of the Outer Rim, in the minds of those who still dreamed of power. The sand remembers. On Tatooine, the twin suns rose over the same desert that had once held a boy's footsteps. The wind moved across the dunes, shaping them as it always had. It did not care for prophecy or empires or even the name Skywalker, but the grains remembered. Every footstep, every fall, every rise. The shadow that had been Darth Vader was gone, but the story, his story, would remain, told and retold, in voices that would change, in words that would twist, in meanings that would shift like dunes in the wind. Some would speak of him as a monster. Some would speak of him as a savior. Few would know the truth. The holocron closes, but the voice does not fade, for the Force does not fade. And somewhere, in the place where all echoes meet, the sound of a boy's laughter drifts on the wind, a boy who once built dreams from sand, and learned, in the end, that even the strongest shadows can fall.